Yo, parish orphans and retrogrades. I'm joined by my friend Dr. Edmund Mazza today to discuss Francis's ex-anti-doppelganger, Cardinal Martini, the man who would be Pope, the man who is supposed to be Pope. As a matter of fact, Dr. Mazza, if not for one word, one single word, we would have a Martini pontificate, a shrewder, craftier, more charismatic man doing the exact same things Francis has chosen to do. Francis is actually a fill-in for Martini, if not for this one word. And that one word is Parkinson's. A Parkinson's diagnosis of Cardinal Martini revealed in 2002 meant that the people that gave us Cardinal Martini, that gave us Francis, eventually would have to surrogate Francis for Martini. We're going to examine your evidence, Dr. Mazza, and you have a lot of it. I listened to a lecture from you on Christmas Eve that was really, really impressive. And I think you'll be able to make the case for us here today. But anyway, Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, and thanks for being with me once again.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Timothy. Happy New Year and Merry Christmas. And if I'm a little awkward today, it's because I lost my lucky turkey bone and I no longer have access to the Great Western Grandmother.
Right. Yeah, Pachamama, is it? A kind of
No,
Pachamama of sorts, which is thematically on point today. So don't be awkward.
okay.
We'll I don't even know if one should joke of such things, but there's always the Great Earth Mother. No, I can't even make that joke. There is no Great Earth Mother, but don't be awkward. No need, because never fear. We are going to get to the root of things. Dr. Edmund Mazza, was Cardinal Martini the Francis the First that Bergoglio became? Was he supposed to be that, if not for, but for a Parkinson's diagnosis in 2002, which changed the entire destiny of, well, Francis and Martini? They probably didn't change the destiny of the church, because your argument is, and the people that have looked at this, like Julia Maloney, who I'm going to be citing some of her work today, it's the exact same pontificate, just a less charismatic, less crafty form that we would have gotten under Martini. Am I right?
Absolutely. The Pope splainers would try to justify these unorthodox statements that come out of Bergoglio's mouth with numbing regularity and try to explain it away. But how do you explain it away when this has been regurgitated before by someone who was a known dissenter and a heretic? I mean, let's call things what they are, right? In 1999, as early as 1999, I can give you a quote from Martini, who was the Archbishop of Milan, in which he listed those things. Well, it's his dream. He said, "I had a dream." It's funny. We're the Martin Luther King Day is coming up Monday the 15th. I'm actually going to have a 3-hour seminar, Popes, Prophecies, and Anti-Popes. Folks can go to edmundmazza.com and enroll. But Martini had a dream, and he said what the key issues for the collegial and authoritative exchange among all the bishops, the key issues should be the shortage of ordained ministers, the role of woman in society and in the church, the discipline of marriage, the Catholic vision of sexuality, penitential practices, relations with the sister churches of Orthodoxy, and more in general, the need to revive ecumenical hopes, the relationship between democracy and values, and between civil laws and the moral law. So that's 1999 at some synod of bishops where he gave his dream. And I think it's fair to say Bergoglio is fulfilling his dream.
Yeah, I'm looking at this is a combination mashup of works put together by Mrs. Maloney, Julia Maloney, who's a friend of this show. And what she cites is either the last years of the 20th century, the late 90s, or the first years of the 21st century, 0102, before Martini's revelation of his Parkinson's diagnosis in 2002, where he said, I will have to step down. We're going to have to get a new Martini. Hadn't he been on the Time magazine cover as the anti-pope?
Right.
The pope. Well, Martini spoke in this setting I'm talking about, late 90s, early 2000s, of his incoming program for the next pope, whether it was him or someone else. I'm citing Miss Maloney. Decentralizing the church. Synodality, it is often called decentralizing the church, according to Francis. New answers the Pope would, quote unquote, have to give on sex ethics, communion for the divorced and civilly remarried, and the question of the diaconate for women. Does that sound familiar, anybody? Are we having fun yet? Are we? This is absolutely programmatic. It is programmatic, which is a term that doesn't get used often enough here in America. It's a term the Europeans like, European academics, but it means that it's a design according to a program. And Francis has played the playbook. When he essentially became the surrogate for Martini, Martini had built this group around himself called the St. Gallen Mafia. They started meeting in 1996. 6 years later, in 2002, he realized he was too sick going into the conclave that would be. It eventuated in 2005. And so they started looking for a Martini replacement. And it is allegedly, according to Miss Maloney, and according to Austin Ivory, the Pope's very biographer, in a recent article, I think 2017, that it was not Martini, but it was Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, who was having a conversation with Austin Ivory, who was his secretary at the time. And he said, around this time when they realized they're going to have to switch out Martini for Bergoglio. This is a fact. Well, what do you know about the Cardinal from Buenos Aires? He's the guy that can get this done. That's not part of the direct quote, but he's the guy that can get this done, is the subtext. What do you say, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, we can just go through quotes from Martini and see that Bergoglio is just spouting Martini quotes in his own words. As you point out, he was sick with Parkinson's in 2002, and Martini died in September of 2012.
Yeah.
And just before he died, he gave his sort of last testament, his interview. And I can give you an English translation. And let's just pick the topic of communion for the divorced and remarried. This is a quote from Martini, one of the last things he said before he went to his eternal judgment. Quote, "Who are the sacraments for? The sacraments are not an instrument of discipline, but a help for people in their journey and in the weaknesses of their life. Are we carrying the sacraments to the people who need new strength? I think of all the divorced and remarried couples to extended families. They need special protection. The attitude we hold towards extended families determines the ability of the church to be close to their children. A woman, for instance, is abandoned by her husband and finds a new companion who takes care of her and her 3 children. This second love succeeds. If this family is discriminated against, not only is the mother cut out from the church, but also her children. And of course, and this is me talking, by discrimination, of course, Martini is referring to the fact that if they are having sexual relations, they're not allowed to receive Holy Communion. And he finishes by saying this, quote, if the parents feel like they're outside the church and don't feel its support, notice he keeps repeating the word feel, right?
Yeah.
It's feelings-based theology here, and don't feel its support, the church will lose the future generation. Before communion, we pray, Lord, I am not worthy. We know we're not worthy. Love is a grace. Love is a gift. The question of whether the divorced can receive communion ought to be turned around. How can the church reach people who have complicated family situations, bringing them help with the power of the sacraments? That is Amoris Laetitia right there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's the whole point of Amoris Laetitia, is that paragraph right there. It explicates it better than Francis did in Amoris Laetitia. He had to, in a serpentine way, in a labyrinthine way, a deliberately semi-vague way, slip in and out of body text and footnotes all throughout chapter 8 of Amoris Laetitia to explicate that precise point. What he actually explicated doesn't make any sense in Amoris Laetitia. This is the proposition with its justification in Martini's script, and it makes far more sense.
And it's almost word for word what you repeated from Casper a few shows ago, where Casper came up with this, what is it, example, right, to try to, the train example to, about the woman who's in a new relationship and blah, 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 right?
Right. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Now, what people have to understand is that Cardinal Casper, Cormac Murphy O'Connor, who's the one that used to work with Austin Ivory, he kind of bequeathed Austin Ivory to Francis when Bergoglio became Pope, and Cardinal Carl Lehman, all became cardinals in February of 2001 with Cardinal with Bishop Bergoglio at the time, who became Cardinal Bergoglio, and of course, shortly thereafter, they would all make the formal shift from the Sankt Gallen papacy will be a Francis papacy, a Bergoglio Francis papacy, not a Martini-Francis papacy. Martini probably would have picked Francis as a name too. Isn't that kind of spooky? So, yeah. So when you talk about Martini, who was dead by the time his vision was achieved, he died in 2012. The Francis pontificate that he was supposed to head began a year later to 8 months later. Bergoglio became Francis, Pope Francis. And so Cardinal Martini, who'd been sick with Parkinson's for 10 years before expiring and going to his eternal judgment, was not his main advisor, even though he was the Don. He was in charge of Bergoglio. He was in charge of Cormac Murphy O'Connor. He was in charge of Cardinal Lehman. He was in charge of Cardinal Casper. He'd been a cardinal for a long time. These guys were all new together, Bergoglio, Casper, Murphy O'Connor, and Lehman, in February of 2001. Did you know that, Ed? They all became cardinals at the same time? Because, yeah, this
No,
kind
I
of...
hadn't known that particular aspect. No. And so we've talked about divorced for the communion for the divorced and remarried. How about this quote? And see if you haven't heard this before. See if this isn't deja vu. Quote, among people I know, there are SS couples, people who are highly regarded and public-minded. Again, this is Martini here. I have never been asked, and it would never occur to me to judge them, unquote. This is from 2008, people, from a book called Nocturnal Conversations with Cardinal Martini. Creep me out, why don't you?
Have you read that whole book? I've always thought the name is super creepy, because it is, but I've never gotten around to reading it, and I should.
Not the whole thing, no. Maybe some Halloween I will.
In what is it? Julia Maloney reports that Bishop and Cardinal Bergoglio. I don't have the same worldview you do about whether or not Pope Francis is Pope, whether Bergoglio is Pope Francis. So when I say Bergoglio, I'm using the term in an equivocal way as to the way you would use it, at least post 2013. I'm saying Bergoglio to demarcate that I'm talking about either him as Archbishop or as Cardinal. I'll call him. I chronologically, I stamp it with Francis after March of 2013. But Bergoglio was a huge fan, according to Julia Maloney, of quoting Martini. Did you know that? Which, Ed, that's what the whole show is about, is that he would quote him previous to becoming Pope. I guess our episode today is really about the fact that as Pope, Francis has continued to be a fan of quoting Martini, who is the mastermind of the revolution.
And that's why, again, people get on our case for criticizing Francis or Bergoglio. But just to throw a factoid out there, the Code of Canon Law for the Church from 1917 to 1982 said that whoever willingly and knowingly helps in the promotion of heresy is automatically suspected of heresy. So we have no choice but to accuse Papa Francesco of heresy, since he's promoting Martini and et al., who are heretics. I mean, you know what I'm trying to say?
Sure. Yeah.
Also, Thomas Aquinas, and this is something that, again, that the Pope's, I've said this before, but it bears reiterating. The Pope-splainers don't seem to understand the principle that St. Thomas Aquinas laid down, that Aquinas says we ought to deem someone good by interpreting for the best whatever is doubtful about him, unless we have evident indications of a person's wickedness. Therefore, Bergoglio doesn't get the benefit of the doubt anymore.
Yeah, I like when you said that to me last week. I liked it a lot. It's a great point, Dr. Mazza, here on Rules for Retrogrades, making it clear that if someone has a track record, then they don't receive the benefit of the doubt, and it's a point that is Thomistic.